When you're ready, let's start this game.
Welcome to BCPL Unstacked, and let's unwind with authors. That's right, two authors, Malone and Chris Kennedy. Let's find out about their writing processes, science fiction and fantasy, all about their new titles, and an event that benefits the Friends of the Bay County Public Libraries. Hey, this is Sarah.
And this is Stephen with the Bay County Public Library.
Ian, could you introduce our listeners to your newest title, Detron City Vice, and a bit about the Mako universe?
Sure. Yeah. Detron City Vice was my latest solo outing that I did. It is by all rights the fourth book in the Mako series, the Mako universe, if you will, following what's called the Mako Saga trilogy, and that consists of Mako, Red Sky Dawning, and At Circle's End. That wrapped up in around 2016. And after the trilogy was done, I went off and I did a lot of other things, most notably in the Four Horsemen universe, which I'm sure Chris will get to here shortly. But, Mako was where it all began for my writing career. Mako was my first book. And I always knew that I wanted to come back to that world at some time. And I knew that I wanted to do it around the character of Danny Tucker. And I also knew that I had been watching a ton of one of my favorite old shows growing up, and that was Miami Vice at the time. So put that together with the fact that I was listening to a lot of techno and watching a lot of car shows. It was like, I really need to do a Miami Vice and space book. So Detron City was again kind of the fourth Mako book, but it is set and written in such a way that if you have not read the original Mako trilogy, you should be able to pick that one up and follow along just fine with who everybody is, what's going on in the world, because it is something of a reset for what's happening in that universe. My newest book is actually the one that just came out May the 21st, was a collaboration with our good friend here, Chris Kennedy, and that's The Street Survivors, which is set in the Four Horsemen universe. And I'm sure we'll get to that after a while.
Chris, you're a writer, editor, publisher. You do a bit of everything and you're very busy. So it's kind of hard to track what your latest title was. I know you've done several of the Four Horsemen universe anthologies. And you have a title, Into the Light, which is an Out of Dark, the second title for that, co-written with David Weber. So tell us a little bit more about your titles.
Okay, certainly. I started out as an author, self-published author, was doing pretty well. Number of other authors, saw and said, well, hey, I don't want to do this publishing thing. Looks like you have a handle on it. How about publishing me? Okay. And then another couple said it, and another couple. And before I knew it, I was a publisher, totally surprising me, probably more than anyone else. Then, just kind of had to adapt into the role of editor as well, being senior editor for Chris Kennedy Publishing. Then we started up the Four Horsemen universe, which really took off. It's up to 65 books now, I think. The first book in the series, Cartwright's Cavaliers, has sold almost 20,000 copies, plus has almost 10 million page reads on Amazon. So it's done really well, and all the other books behind it are tracking along pretty well. My day is pretty much broken up into half. In the morning I write, in the afternoon I publish, and then in the evening I usually edit. So I guess that's broken up into three, not two. I wasn't a math major, sorry.
So what drew the two of you into science fiction writing?
Oh, wow. That would actually be a chance encounter in Raleigh. A number of years ago, David Weber had, for those who are fans of military sci-fi, that's a name obviously you'll know. His kind of flagship convention for his Honor Harrington system was for a number of years here in Raleigh. And Chris and I both attended that convention as, authors in Authors Alley. And I want to say it was the first year we were both there. We were set up side by side at our tables. And so naturally, when you spend 3 days at a convention together and your tables are right beside each other, you strike up conversations. And so begat the 72-hour run of discussion on everything from writing and the craft to indie publishing, to book marketing, to rock and roll, to which genre of rock and roll was the best, 70s, 80s, or 90s, versus fish sandwiches versus Philly cheesesteak sandwiches, fries versus onion rings, and so on and so forth. So naturally, that should tell you we became pretty fast friends, and we stayed in touch over the years. We had always dreamt of doing a collaboration, which I'm really grateful that we finally got to do this year. But our kind of formal arrangement working together as author publisher began when I was called in to be a part of the second Four Horsemen universe anthology for a few credits more. And that was kind of how we professionally got together, but we date back as friends for some time.
Yeah. And I think that the one thing that really impressed me when I met Ian was that he was pretty much a kindred spirit. He likes a lot of the things that I do. And he also is very professionally oriented. You see a lot of authors, especially self-published authors, that don't really put a lot of craft into it or a lot of time into writing the best book possible or getting the best cover or doing all of the little things that professionals do. And certainly I like to run my publishing company as a professional thing. It is the business I run, and if it does poorly, I don't eat, which is definitely something that I like to do, and often. In case you couldn't tell, I'm sitting down, so you can't see how big I've gotten. But I really was impressed with Ian's knowledge and his energy in pursuing all of the things to do the right things, to become the best author he could be. And all of those kind of little things that made me really want to get together with Ian and, work with him. And we have, certainly on and off ever since, although we've begun to work a lot more closely recently, obviously, as the book that we wrote together shows.
So out of that conversation, I have to ask, 70s, 80s, or 90s, what won?
I'm going to go with 70s. That's me.
I'm going to have to go 80s, but there's a lot good to be said about the 70s as well.
All right. I would have said 90s, but it's
And Sarah would have said there were people alive then.
I think probably either 90s probably for me as well. Yeah.
I don't discriminate when it comes to my rock and roll. I grew up in the household of a 60s, 70s hippie back in his heyday who played guitar at the local restaurant to pay for meals in college. So, the Allman Brothers, the Doobie Brothers, Leonard Skinner, the Eagles, James Taylor, like that was I was raised on that stuff. And then right around high school, I went to work for a radio station, and anybody who's ever worked in radio knows you don't just get one radio station in a building. There's like 4 or 5 with all different genres. And so the floodgates opened at that point, and I pretty much listen to about anything and everything now. So that's a roundabout way of saying I don't discriminate against my rock and roll. I love just about all of it, but I was raised on the 70s, and on that I shall take my stand.
To date myself here, when I was growing up in high school, one of my nightly rituals was to pop on an old Monkees LP and just go to sleep listening to that with the big old headphones, just listen to, Last Train to Clarksville and all that other stuff. So I've got it in me. It's just,
Nice.
Awesome.
So for the Chris Kennedy Publishing Company, what kind of authors do you have that kind of fall under that umbrella? What were you looking for?
I really want people that can tell a good story. And these days you get a lot of people that are more worried about putting a message into the story. You ought to do this, you ought to do that. I'm really looking for authors that tell good stories. Certainly I like them to have, a drive to improve their craft every day. Hardworking people that want to get better. Basically that it's all about the story. Because if you can tell a good story, we have editors and we can help get it in shape and turn it into something a little more readable, perhaps. But the ability to tell a story is something that not everybody's born with, and certainly that's what I'm really looking for in an author.
So a fun read.
Mm-hmm. Oh, absolutely. I look at it, first and foremost as a reader, is this something that I'd want to read? Life's hard enough as it is, and there's enough bad things, and, you can turn on the TV and get your fill of all of that. Books to me are escape. I read as escapism. I want to go to other planets. I want to meet aliens. I want to, do all of those things, that take me away from my troubles, my worries, my whatever. Because, everybody has worries. Everybody has things that are bothering them, or things they wish that could be better, and to me, books take you away from that. I've been a reader ever since I was, young. I grew up in High Point, North Carolina. The library there knew that anytime they got new shipments of science fiction, that they should call my mom, because I had read all the rest of them. And we'd come in and get them that day. I read a lot.
That's awesome.
I'd like to add on to that if I
Go for
could. One of the hallmarks for me of a CKP book are just the relatable characters, the memorable characters that serve as really kind of the engine to so many of the stories that come out of that press, whether it's Jim Cartwright or Alexis Cromwell, or, pick a protagonist from the Four Horsemen universe, whether it's Cade from the Fallen World universe, which is a post-apocalyptic series out of CKP, whether it's Harmon Tomrell and the crew out of the Salvage Title universe from Kevin Steverson, who's also going to be at the event that I'm sure we're going to talk about later. And that's a series that just got signed to a movie deal with Hideout Pictures. And it all started because every one of these books and every one of these series has a totally flesh and blood, three-dimensional character that you just can't not keep turning the page to see what happens to them. And to me, that's the hallmark of a great story is if I'm invested in the people, I want to be there. And, for anybody who's been over on my website, that's kind of my tagline, if you will, is character charged sci-fi with a shot of rock and roll. I very much like to hang my hat on that. And so a number of years ago, when I got out of the indie publishing business and sold the Mako Saga, I really didn't look any further than CKP. I approached Chris and said, listen, I'd like to relaunch these with new covers. And I think they can reach a new audience. And I believe your press is the perfect fit in order to be able to drive that train. And I haven't looked back and I haven't regretted it, but it all came back to that notion of having real life flesh and blood characters that you feel with and that you hurt with and you cry with and you pump a fist with and you smile with. You got that. You've got the makings of a good story.
And Ian is versatile enough to have written in all of those universes too. He's been in the Salvage Title universe. He's written in the Fallen World, and he's done some great stuff in the Four Horsemen universe. He's carved his own little niche out of that universe that it was so good, and the folks loved so much that it originally started out kind of as a side thing, but it's now come into the light because it was so good, that we wanted to make sure everybody, was aware of it and gave it a look.
And I'd be remiss if I didn't say that Mako outsold Star Wars for one day, and it was awesome. And I still have the Amazon screenshot right over here on my computer.
Yeah, there was one day, was it January this year that?
Yes, it was. That
it sold about, I forget, 2,500 copies just in that day.
Yep, it did well. A lot of renegades were made that day.
Yes, they were.
Kind of building on what you were talking about with the character development, how much, what goes into the world building process when you're writing these kind of stories, and how much of it takes place before you even start writing, and how much takes place after once you're getting in the heart of something?
Chris, I'm going to let you field that one because you have built gobs of worlds at CKP. I'll add what little nugget I can afterward, but you're the man here, so I'm going to let you take lead.
Every book is different. I can't say I always do it this way or I always do it that way. I'm more of a pantser than a plotter, if you're familiar with those terms. I typically don't plot out the books as much. Usually I know where I'm starting and where I'm ending, but the journey to get from one to the other is often is half of the fun for me, finding out what happens. I have plotted sometimes, specifically the book that you mentioned with David Weber. That one was a sequel to his book, Out of the Dark. That was my first real chance at seeing how plotter, the preeminent plotter goes. Before we even sat down to write, he had already written 100,000 words into what we were going to write about. He had written a book about the book we were going to write. And that only covered the first third of it. And so we wrote the first third of it, and he's like, give me a second. And he wrote another 100,000 words for the second third. And I'm like, oh my gosh, is this what plotters do? Wow. I don't want to be a plotter ever. You know, he wrote like 4 books to write the one book. And I mean, and it came off very well. It stayed right on track. You know, there were a couple other things that, you know, I added something. He'd be like, oh yeah, that's really cool. And since you did that, we need to do this. And, you know, and that made it a lot of fun. But it wasn't really the way that I typically like to do it. You know, I like the journey and finding out as much. You know, there was nothing quite so fun for me one time. I was going along and I was this was the second or third book in a series, and somebody that had been a good guy all along all of a sudden flipped and became a bad guy, and no one was more surprised than me. I was like, oh my God, how did that happen? How did I not see that? You know, so it I think I've talked a lot, but I haven't really answered your question. The answer is it varies. You know, and sometimes it's plotting, sometimes it's planning, trying to figure out, you know, what you need to tell the story. You know, so we'll come back to the story, you know, what's going on and who are the characters, because people fall in love with characters. You know, like Ian said, you know, the people that you can cheer for or cheer against. You know, a good antagonist is often, you know, as strong as a good protagonist. And you know, we had one in the Four Horsemen universe, an alien whose name was Peepo, and people were just waiting for the demise of Peepo. How come she's not dead yet? You know, and that went on for a long time, and that was fun.
Yeah, I'm somewhere in between. I started out a pantser all the way. My first 2 books were you know, writing from the seat of your pants. And right around book 3, I decided that, you know what, I'm going to try this outlining thing. And I found that for me, that helped me develop. And again, this is just my own, all writers are different, and this is my approach. That helped me.
And it's totally fun. He's a plotter. He's a plotter.
A little bit. Don't be throwing shade at me now, man.
There's nothing wrong with it. Like you said, every author's different. It's what works for you.
I am a plotter to a degree. The greatest analogy I ever heard for creating an outline for a book is it's like a roadmap, right? If I'm sitting in Raleigh, North Carolina, and I want to come down to Panama City, Florida, my roadmap tells me how to get from Raleigh to Panama City. But if I get halfway down I-95 South and I see a sign on the side of the road that says world's biggest ball of yarn 30 miles, you know, west towards, you know, wherever, I might decide I want to see the world's biggest ball of yarn. That's fascinating to me. Whoever knew they could make a ball of yarn that big? I'm going to go. So I go and I get off and I drive 30 miles out of my way and I check it out and I marvel at the world's biggest ball of yarn. And then the roadmap tells me how to get back on my way to Panama City.
We all marveled at your world's biggest ball of yarn.
The ball of yarn. So, you know, I mean, that's kind of how I view outlining, you know, very much like Chris. When I start a story, I typically know where it's going to begin and I know where it's going to end. And building the outline kind of helps me get there in a way that I feel it keeps me from missing plot holes. You know, I'm a little ADD in that regard. I get rolling with imagination and I'm everywhere. I'm creating new characters. I'm building new tech. I'm building new worlds. It's awesome. And I can miss things. And so, you know, the outline helps me kind of keep all of that in line and in sync where it needs to be. So readers don't get mad at me. But it also helps me to create a good, well-paced story that makes sense on the page. So I'm somewhere in the middle when it comes to that. As for your question about world building versus, you know, character development first, for me, everything starts with a character. In a lot of respects, I kind of build the world to be what I need it to be in order to facilitate that particular character's journey or that story. You know, in the case of Detron City Vice, I knew Danny Tucker was going to go off on a missing persons case. I knew he was going to go looking for, you know, a missing kid, and that was going to take him into an underworld of drugs and, you know, all kinds of craziness on this other planet, because you can't write a Miami Vice story without drugs, and you can't do sci-fi without space. So, you know, the question became, how do I build a world that reflects that? well, I've already got established canon in the Mako trilogy. First and foremost, let's go back and remember who the big players are, what are the big territories, what are the disputes, and how can we craft a new world that fits this story that needs to be told in such a way that it makes sense with established canon, while at the same time totally making sense in this story. And along the way, we're going to create alien Grand Prix races and drugs and weapons and a sci-fi Ferrari, which that's just never a bad way to spend your time as a writer.
It's a ball of yarn.
It really is. It is a ball of yarn. Yeah. In the case of an established universe, like the Four Horsemen universe, that can be a little bit trickier because now you're stepping into somebody else's sandbox and there are rules that you have to play by and things in that universe that you would, have to adhere to. I mean, by nature, I'm more of a space opera zoom guy. I grew up on the Millennium Falcon, not the Starship Enterprise. All right. I like fast. I like really cool, fast stuff. You know what? Four Horsemen universe is a little bit more grounded in reality. You don't get to zoom. There are rules. There is no anti-gravity, for instance. And that took me a while to get used to. But I found a way to kind of bend all of that around the story that I needed to tell. And that's when I was able to get rolling with my outline and tell what I needed to tell, whether it was Detention City Vice, whether it was Freebird Rising, Colonies Lost, you name it. It all started with the story and the characters for me.
Ian brings up a good point. When you write in somebody else's universe, it's really a challenge to tell your story, but remain faithful to that universe. We've had a lot of different people write in the Four Horsemen universe, not just full length books, but we've got 11 anthologies. So that's 11 times 15. We've already proven I can't do math. So I'm going to say it's a lot of authors. And in trying to keep all of them within canon, you build this box and you say, okay, this is the box, you got to stay in it. And the first thing that some cats do when they come into a sandbox isn't make a sandcastle. They do other things that are just not quite as pleasant. So you kind of got to herd the cats in the right direction and make sure that everything, is faithful, because the readers will call you out if it's not. And there's nothing, so offended as a reader that you've told them, hey, 1 + 1 = 2, but now you're saying it equals 3. That's not fair. You're cheating. You're doing, so you have to keep it, you got to stay faithful to the canon. And when you're the owner of the universe, you really got to bear down on some people to make sure they do.
You guys will both be in Panama City soon. So let's chat about Lasers and Loggers and the authors. It's going to take place June 29th at 5 p.m. Central. Tell us about what's happening. And we really appreciate you reaching out, and that some of the proceeds will be going to the Friends of the Bay County Public Library.
This one's Ian's, because this is his baby. And he put this all together, and this is him.
Well, it's, as you said, it's the event is called Lasers and Loggers. It's going to happen June 29th, starting at 5 p.m. at the library on Beck, which is a craft beer and wine bar over on Beck Avenue. If you want more information on that, it's very simple. Go to lasersandloggers.com and you got everything you need, from what's going on at the event to the authors who are going to be there, links to their author website. So if you want to go read about their works and their books and where they're at, then you can go find them on social media, you name it. All of this started really because Panama City is a town that I love. I'm a native of Tallahassee, Florida. All right. I grew up, I'm Leon High School, Florida State, Tallahassee Community College through and through. All right. You don't grow up in Tallahassee and not spend a ton of time in Panama City. That's where you go, particularly if you are a high school or a college kid. And this is back in the 90s. And Panama City was a slightly different place back then. But suffice to say, I spent a ton of time over in Bay County, and it's always been an area that has been very near and dear to me for a lot of reasons. Some of my best friends in the world still call Bay County home to this day. So, I mean, that first and foremost, that was a big deal to me to have the opportunity to do something down there. As for how the event came to be, it just was total happenstance. I was goofing around on social media one day, and I saw, because I keep an eye on small businesses down there and what's opening and what's closing and so on and so forth. And I saw where there was a local craft beer bar that had a library theme. And there's books all over the place, and you go in and you pull a book off the shelf, show it to the bartender, they give you a free beer, like this total literary book theme at a bar. And I thought, holy cow, that's like my brand. like in every way. That is awesome.
Must go there.
Must go there. And so I just, haphazardly threw up a comment on social media that, wow, wouldn't that be a cool place to do an author signing one day? And they hit me up in the comments and said, we'd love to have you actually. So I messaged the bar and said, listen, here's who I am. Here's what's going on. I'm going to be in your neck of the woods late June. I would love to do an author signing. But by the way, I know other people who might want to actually come down and make an event out of this. And while we're there, why don't we do something fun to raise some money for local literacy? That's obviously, with all of us being writers and publishers, that's a big deal to us. I mean, CNN published an article a year or two ago that talked about the impact of libraries. And I mean, it's estimated 1.3 billion people walk into a library at some point in the course of a given year globally, every year, 1.3 billion people. So, it doesn't matter if you're looking for entertainment, if you're just a John Smith looking to self-educate on how to open a small business, whether you're just looking to build community with other readers, libraries are where that happens. And so that's a big deal to us as writers, not to mention the fact that you guys really go out of your way to support us as authors. So, that was when I reached out to Sarah, obviously being attached to Bay County Library, and said, okay, I need a good local charity that will keep this money in town. I don't want this going to some big megacorp charity. I want it to stay in Bay County. What can you tell me about? She said, well, I can tell you about the Friends of the Bay County Public Libraries. That's who I can tell you about. And so began the marriage. But, bringing it all back home, it's just Lasers and Loggers became a great way for me to come home and give back to a local community that I go back 30 plus years with, an area that means a lot to me, in a way and in a setting that speaks to what I do as a writer, that speaks to the things that I love, which are spaceships, family, friends, and beer. And I get to do it in a town that means a lot to me and give money back to that cause. So I know that was rambling and crazy and not my most succinct answer today, so forgive me for that, but it is something that I'm extremely passionate about. And I really do hope people will come out and support, because I love this town. I love writing, and libraries are a big part of that. So if we can raise some money for you guys, then we are thrilled to come down and do it.
Right. And I lived in Northwest Florida for a couple of years. You can see over my shoulder right there. I was a naval aviator, so I was in Pensacola for a couple of years. And then another year later on in my career. So, I'm familiar with Northwest Florida. Love the area. When Ian said, hey, I'm looking to put this together, my wife and I RV, and we said, well, sure, we'll make a trip of it. We'll come down. We're going to come down and see some other things and scoot over to Panama City and then head back up and turn it into, somewhat of a vacation. Absolutely. Everything Ian said about supporting libraries. My wife was a librarian for the Virginia Beach system for a while. So that's something that when I suggested coming down to Florida at the end of June, my wife, who is Canadian and not necessarily a fan of heat and humidity, such as what Northwest Florida has, end of June, she was like, yes, but okay, let's go, because it was for the library, and and the venue's cool, and we've got some friends that are going to come down as well, and I put it out to the authors of CKP and several others that are close by or can get there, said, yeah, sounds like fun. What? A thing at a bar? Okay, I'm in.
Yeah. Well, we've got a great lineup of authors too, man. I mean, we really, really did well. I mentioned earlier the Salvage Title universe that was created by Kevin Steverson, who has got a number of other books in that world, has also written in the Four Horsemen universe, has written in some fantasy stuff over at CKP. He is going to be there. His son, who's actually following in the family business, if you will, Nick Steverson, who still lives down in the Bonifay area, he is going to be there. He's written a couple of books in Salvage Title universe.
He's cheating. It's easy for him.
Right? Hey, man, I've read some of his stuff. It's solid work.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
I like those guys. Rob Howell, who is now the head of New Mythology Press, which is the fantasy imprint of CKP. He has also been an author in the Four Horsemen universe, a number of fantasy books. He's got a new book coming out this month, actually, called The Ravening of Wolves. He's going to be down there. So fantasy folks, come down and check him out. We also have Barbara V. Evers, who's a couple of times winners over for her series, The Watchers of Benaiah. She has been recognized with a number of different awards for her work, and she's got a bunch of stuff brewing it right now in CKP2 in the fantasy world. So it really doesn't matter what you're into, man. If it's 10-foot tall battle mechs and power armor, we're going to have that at Lasers and Loggers. If you want zoom spaceships and aliens, we're going to have that at Lasers and Loggers. If you're into swords and sorcery and wizardry and the world of fantasy and magic, we're going to have that at Lasers and Loggers. So if you're a reader, come out and meet us, buy a book, support local libraries. If you're a writer, not a bad way to spend your evening getting to know other writers, a couple of whom happen to double as big time publishers. Just saying.
Yeah.
I plan to be there.
Because obviously y'all have a bunch of different series that kind of go on. How do you, when you're writing a series, how do you keep it fresh to yourself, but still keep it fresh to the readers as well?
Once again, I'm going to fall back on I'm a reader first and an author second. I was a reader a lot longer than I was, than I've been an author. Some people grow up going, oh, I want to write when I grow up. I want to be an author. 81% of people have a story they want to tell. Not me. I was always in the 19%. I didn't have a story, never wanted to be an author. When I did my doctoral dissertation, I wrote this document and I said, hooray, I never have to write anything again. Since then, I've written about, 3 million words, and, funny how things turn out. But I, okay, I did this thing to this guy. What else can I do to him? What else can go wrong in his life that he'll have to overcome? What about her? She had this thing, but now, dun, 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 so it's what can you do? What challenges can you throw up? And how can you have your characters overcome them? It gets back to that character thing in the story. But it's a matter of making the journey worthwhile. If you don't want a character that everything comes easy to, you don't want, oh, my life is good. Oh, look, I'm Superman. Look, nobody can touch me. Ha ha ha. Bullets bounce off. If there's no danger, if there's no peril, there's no story.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, as far as staying in touch with what we're writing, I'm a big fan of audiobooks for a whole lot of different reasons. For starters, I'm legally blind. So audiobooks is how I've consumed literature since I was 9 years old. It is what it is. The other awesome thing about audio is you can consume that almost anywhere while you're doing almost anything. So if I'm reading a book for the first time, I don't typically like to do that. I like to sit down and listen to a book just like everybody else. If it's a book I've been through, though, I will buzz back through it while I'm standing in the kitchen cleaning dishes, or standing outside at a grill grilling a steak, or cleaning up around my office or whatever. I'll have an audiobook on and be listening to it, and that's prime time to go back and revisit things. So case in point, I just wrapped a short story for an upcoming anthology set in Kevin Steverson's Salvage Title universe. So I went back and reread the first couple of his books, Salvage Title and Salvage Fleet. I've got the audiobooks from my Audible account, drop them onto my phone, plug them in, grab some earbuds, and away I go. So, when we set out to write The Street Survivors, which is the new book from Chris and I set in 4HU, I needed to go back and revisit the characters and the world that I created down in Jacksonville, in 2018, 2019, when I wrote Freebird Rising. Grab the audiobook, plug it in, listen to it all over again, 6-7 hours later, and you're completely up to speed with everything you need to know. So for me, audio is really a great way to go when it comes to not only just consuming literature, but as a writer, going back and brushing back up over things so I'm fresh and I'm ready to write in that world again.
And I had to do the same thing. I started out my original series, The Theogony. It's gone 11 books. The last book for the series comes out next Friday. And there was a gap in there when I was doing stuff with the Four Horsemen universe, and went about 1.5 years, or maybe it was even 2 years, with no books in that series. And I had to go back and, reread to get all of those characters again, and, get in their minds, and, okay, yeah, this guy thinks this way and he does this thing, and he's likely to say this stuff. And because people that are picking up the books now aren't going to know there was a gap. They're just going to know that all of a sudden this guy changed from this book to the next. That's weird and not like that. So yeah, you really do want to, make sure if you get off, it's fine if you're going from one to the next to the next to the next, but a lot of times authors don't. We're blessed with having a lot of different opportunities. And I jokingly say to the authors at CKP, you're a CKP author when you have more stories that you're supposed to write than you have time to write them. And we have so many cool universes to write in, so many cool things to do. Plus, I encourage all of the authors to write their own stuff, become known for something. By the time you do all that, you're kind of jumping around. Okay, I'm going to do this thing, then I'm going to do that thing. Now I need to come back to my stuff again. And you really do have to refresh yourself and make sure that you're staying true to those characters.
I would add to that, by the way, the nice thing about writing over at CKP, and I'm sure lots of other publishers do this as well. If you go to write in an established universe, you're going to get a Bible for that, whether it's 4HU, whether it's Salvage, whether it's Fallen World. If you sign up to do something as small as a short story for an anthology, you're going to get the universe Bible for that. So when the time comes to, to run back over something and kind of freshen up to write something new, you can always go back to the Bible. And while that's not going to give you, exact stuff on characters, how the world works, the mechanics of the world, the rules of the world, alien species, towns, communities, whatever, that's all going to be there. And that is another great way to kind of get your mind shifted back into the gear that it needs to be able to be to write in that sandbox.
I heard somewhere that there's like a new title every 3 weeks from the press.
Every week.
Every week.
Yeah.
Wow.
The last 2 years we published 60 books each year.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure the reason he can write techno stuff is because he's secretly a cyborg and he just won't tell anybody because clearly he doesn't sleep, y'all.
Oh, three years ago, my wife said, how many books did you publish this year? I said 44. She said, you really need to slow down a little bit. You're probably trying to do too much. You need to relax a little bit. And I said, you're right. You're absolutely right. So I slowed down the next year and published 60.
And that, sometimes you got to do that.
And then 60 again the next year. So, and that's about what we're going to be again this year. I think we're running 4 or 5 ahead of, one per week. So yeah, every Friday is a book. Every Friday has been a book for 3 years. Typically every 3 weeks is a 4 Horsemen book because that's what the audience demanded. It started out like that. It went. They were coming out about 1 a month, and the readers were saying it's not fast enough. We need more. I hate waiting a whole month to get a new one. You got to do better. So it went to 3 weeks, but after that, it's like, okay, I can't do them any tighter than that. We have other things we have to publish too. The authors have great stories, and we need to fill those too. So it's about every 3 to 4 weeks. The last 2 years, it was every 3 weeks. I'm about 3.5 weeks this year. So yeah, we publish a lot.
You do. And now I know the answer for Ian because you like space opera and you already said Star Wars, but Chris, do you prefer Star Wars or Star Trek?
Star Wars. I am science fiction with a touch of fantasy. And that's, Star Wars is actually science fantasy. So that's more me. I like having aliens that do different things and look differently and, imagination, I like having it not be, there are a number of authors that like, hard science fiction, so hard that you can, crack a tooth on it. That's not me. I like to have a little bit of fun, a little bit of fantasy in there as well. Keep it fun.
I'd be remiss if I didn't throw a Firefly shout out here somewhere. I as a guy who also grew up watching Westerns, a la Silverado, name your spaghetti Western of choice awesome. with Clint Eastwood. Sure. I loved Westerns as a kid, and Firefly, for my money, was the first one that got that formula right. Many have tried to merge sci-fi and Westerns, and they have failed epically. And Nathan Fillion, Joss Whedon, that crew, they hit a home run of epic proportions, and I'm so happy that they have not tried to reboot that property. It's great just the way that it is.
And that whole genre blending thing is another interview in and of itself. What works, what doesn't work, but you're absolutely right. I love Westerns too, and that worked. I've seen so many other things that absolutely didn't. So yeah.
So where do you kind of see the future of sci-fi going then?
I mean, I think that's a great choice. I think now is a great question, rather. I think now is just an awesome time to be a fan of the genre because it has so many options. It's gone are the days when you have 5-6 publishers putting out everything in the genre. That's done. That's not coming back. You've got, mid-level presses like CKP and even small presses out there that have 3, 4, 5 authors that are putting out incredible work. And I think that was really the nice thing about the indie revolution was that it taught people, listen, this is not vanity publishing. This is not, hey, I got my manuscript, I'm going to slap it up on Amazon and you go buy it. And it, by the way, it's full of typos and errors and it's complete garbage.
Don't mind the cover.
Right. Don't mind the cover. Just buy it. Just take my word on it. It's awesome. People learned, via that kind of entrepreneurial spirit that, listen, if I want to make money at this, I've got to put out a quality product. And that means researching editors in my genre. That means researching what book covers ought to look like and what sells in my genre. And that has led to the rise of not only worlds and worlds and worlds of quality indie authors, but also small presses that support them and mid-sized presses that support them. A good friend of mine who runs a press out of Charlotte, made a great comment one time when we were on a panel together. He's like, listen, you've got to be a writer by the time you come to a small press. All right. We're not here to teach you how to write. We're here to teach you how to be an author. Well, a lot of the people, and Chris is a great example of this, a lot of the people who run those small presses or mid-level presses started out as authors who had to learn all this stuff themselves. And that's why they're excellent at being able to help new authors, upstart authors be able to take their stuff to market. But to your point, that's led to the rise of source after source after source and franchise after franchise after franchise of amazing stuff, whether it's military sci-fi with the Four Horsemen universe, whether it's space opera with Salvage. There's gobs of indie authors out there who are putting out stuff that's hitting the New York Times. You ask where science fiction is headed. Where is it not at this point would be my response to that.
It's morphing into different forms of media because people like to consume, stories in different forms of media. Audio is going to continue to grow because, like Ian said, you can play it on so many different things. It used to be you needed the ginormous boom box to listen to something. Now, your phone you can play it on your phone, you can play it on your computer, you can play it in your car, you can play it anywhere. So that's going to continue to grow. One of the things that Amazon's doing right now is Kindle Vella, which is more of a serial format. And that kind of breaks it up. And, some people don't want to consume a whole, big book at one time, but if you feed them this week's thing, that's how they like it. And so it's stories are going to continue to grow. And the amazing thing about Amazon is it lets all of us tell our stories without having to, beat down the gate at a traditional publisher where they only take, one new author a year and you've got, literally millions of people standing in line. I think there were 1 million books that came out on Amazon this past year, so people now have a chance to tell great stories that they didn't before. And I think that's going to continue. What's going to change in the near term is how people consume it. And it's going to become, not a matter of how I want to give it to you, but how do you want it? You tell me, and the publishers are going to adapt to, okay, you like it in audio. Okay, here you go. Here's audio. Oh, you want it serialized. Okay, well, we can do that too. I have a book with another author that we wrote that as soon as the serial thing opens up, we're going to put that in there and see how that does. Because we have to be agile enough to go where the readers are. And that's really the change is, no longer can just 5 or 6 companies tell the readers you have to do it this way. Readers are going to get it now however they want. And the publishing companies that are going to remain relevant are the ones that are going to meet the readers there.
And if I could add to that, I think that, if there's one theme to come out of this entire interview as it pertains to either publishing or just spending time, it's this notion of service. Serve your audience, man. Whether it's your readers, whether it's your local community or your local library, as long as you go into doing what you do with, that philosophy of this matters to somebody, this impacts somebody, whether it's just to give them, 6-7 hours of pure escapism, entertainment to make them smile at a time when maybe they're just not that, life is not that good for them, or whether it's to raise money for a great cause, as long as you can, and this is just me, this is my own personal philosophy, as long as you can go into whatever endeavor you're chasing with that kind of a mindset, I don't know that you're ever going to go wrong. But
right.
As readers, buckle up, man. We got lots of books for you guys for that.
and certainly, I've had a number of readers say, your books got me through this period of crap. I don't know what I would have done if I didn't have, the escapism that, the Four Horsemen brought, the Theogony brought, Fallen World, all of those series have proponents that are like, you know what, my life was really bad, but this got me through it. And nothing could make an author happier, than saying, hey, you helped me, you changed me, because, that's at the end of the day, that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to write stories that are meaningful and will take you places and help.
One of the coolest things a reader ever said to me was at a con a couple of years ago. And if she's watching this, she knows who she is. She came up to me at the bar one night after a panel, and she was like, I just want you to know, I've spent my entire life kind of riding the fence between 2 crowds. Like, I had my country crowd because I'm from the deep South, and I had my geek crowd, which was all my role-playing people and space folks and middle science fiction folks. And those were kind of 2 circles. Your book, and this was right around the time Freebird Rising came out, which was my first novel foray into the 4HU. When that came out, and old school rockers, you'll kind of pick up on this. It's set in Jacksonville. The protagonist's name is Van Zant. His brother died in a tragic starship accident. And, the title of the book is Freebird Rising, and title of second book is Street Survivors. So take with that what you will. But that resonated with her. And she's like, I've spent my whole life kind of riding between these 2 crowds, but this book with these characters, this was home for me in just about every way, because it brought all of that together. And I've never been able to fall in line with that in a story the way you did it. And there's a friendliness and a personality to this book that just resonated with me on so many levels because of that. I went to bed a happy man that night. I felt like I had done my job, and I was proud of that.
I'll pile on to what Ian just said then while you decide where we go next. I have a book on writing and publishing. And I was sitting at a table at a convention one time, and somebody came up and was looking at it, and he said, tell me about this book. And okay, well, it helps you with both the business aspect of it, helps you with the writing aspect, blah blah blah. And this girl happened to be walking by, and she stopped and she kind of looked over her shoulder, and she said, I'm sitting here as an author this year because I bought that book last year. And she turned and kept going. And I was like, well, dang. And he's like, do you accept plastic? You can't get any more of an endorsement than I'm an author now because I read this book. And that's the power, of books. Sometimes it challenges you to do things. It helps you to do things. Whether that's fiction, whether it's nonfiction, people have readers have, all sorts of reasons for reading. And, I've been to the library many times to get books that were, nonfiction to help me with something or show me how, or, so the power.
And that leads me into my next question. How have libraries impacted your life?
Well, for the longest time, it was the only way I could get books. Growing up through the 80s and 90s, but particularly the late 80s or so, that was where I had to go to get books on tape, like cassettes, actual cassettes, y'all. And sometimes it was vinyl that had to go on a record player. So, I still remember one of the first books I finally got my hands on, because they actually had it, was Peter Benchley's Jaws. Why I was reading that at like 10, we'll have to ask my parents. But it was awesome. But it was on a big clunky cassette, and that was that. And the library had all of that stuff for me, whether it was Jaws from Peter Benchley, or whether it was Star Trek stories, which I was admittedly a Trekkie in the 80s and 90s because there was no Star Wars. But I read the books, Q and Law and all of those. I read that stuff because it was all on cassette. Louis L'Amour, speaking of Westerns, Sackett brand, pretty much everything Sackett's. I'm going back and rereading those now, Daybreakers and all this awesome stuff. But all of that came from the library, and I'd check them out. And when I was done with one, I'd go back and grab another one. And it was awesome.
You'll remember that I said I read a lot. My parents could not have afforded as many books as what I read, when I was young. When I said the library used to call our house, I'm not kidding. They really did. If it weren't for the library, I wouldn't have been able to keep up. And that probably is why I'm an author today, because I was able to read, as much as I did and have as broad a base. I know David Weber always says, who you are as an author is determined solely by who you are as a reader, and your style and how you tell a story and things like that are based on, pretty much what you used to read, and I can tell you that, in my case, I certainly know that's true. I got all of the Baen books, Baen being a publisher of science fiction and fantasy. I've read, I read all of the ones in the High Point Public Library. And now when Baen readers look at my stuff, they were like, oh yeah, you're a good writer, because, that's what I read. And I have a certain way of telling a story that is very compatible with that publisher.
Well, and it also helps that there are a lot of authors that come out of CKP and then go down the road to Baen. So if you're a fan of Baen books, guys, whether it's Ringo, whether it's Weber, or pick your favorite author, on screen right there is pretty well the AAA baseball for Baen books. Like that's where a lot of people come from. So it's food for thought, man.
We've had a lot of good luck recently. There've been a large number of CKP authors that have shown up in Baen anthologies here over the last year. I wrote with David Weber. Kevin Eikenberry is writing with Eric Flint. There are a number of other projects that I know of that I can't talk about. But there's a lot of goodness going on there.
And saying that kind of makes me laugh. If what you read influences what you are as a writer, I can only imagine where I would be going right now, just based on some of the horrible stuff I've been reading lately.
But I mean, you can't go wrong with that. For perspective, for would-be writers out there, hey man, the bad stuff is just important as the good stuff, because that tells you what you don't want to do in your own work. So you can never go wrong reading to be a better writer ever.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I recently picked up Paperbacks from Hell, which is Grady Hendrix' nonfiction story about 70s and 80s horror books. So it's a lot of exploitation. You're like, it is so just god awful. What the writers themselves are writing under pseudonym, so they don't get associated with it kind of stuff. But yeah, speaking of reading and heavily reading, what would you say is maybe your favorite underappreciated sci-fi or fantasy novel, and why?
I will go with, and I don't know if it's underappreciated because I know a whole lot of people who like this book, but there was a book back from the 80s called Armor from John Stakely, that if you're into like power armor, mechanized warfare type of stuff, a lot of like what we do in the Four Horsemen universe with the Caspers, that book really, really nailed that. But beyond that, it just had an incredible set of characters, mainly the protagonist. There's as all the great books do, by the time you get to the end, there's a, whoa, that just happened. How did I not see that coming moment? And from top to bottom, it's a great read. A buddy of mine, Chris, from back in Orlando, we lived together in Tallahassee, brought that one to my attention years and years and years ago. And I've been through it several times since. I want to say it was published in like 86, I think. So anyway, Armor from John Stakely. Good one.
I'm going to say Minds of Men from Casey Azell. And that's a book I published that she introduced psychics, female psychics, on World War II B-17 bombers in Europe. And her premise was, that by putting them on there, they could better coordinate the planes, they could better defend themselves, do a better job. The book is awesome. Casey Azell is a wonderful writer. She's currently stationed in Japan, so she can't make it to Lasers and Loggers, but she is an outstanding author. Reading her as her publisher has helped me get better. And Minds of Men is the first of a trilogy that is of a similar vein with female psychics, and that is that book has not achieved the acclaim that it should yet. So we keep banging away on it because it's that good.
We kind of touched on this a little bit here, where you said that with both of you kind of leaning more toward that not hard, realistic, cutting your teeth, breaking your teeth off science fiction. Do you feel like, obviously, you focus on some military science fiction. Do you feel like having the military background helps you in this? Is it something that you have to know? Do you have to write things you know, or is it more just having a character and kind of adding flavors as you go along?
It certainly is easy for me to write flying kinds of things because I was an aviator for 20 years. But there are countless people that weren't in the military and have no military background that do just fine writing military sci-fi. It's a matter of reading plenty of military sci-fi so you understand kind of how things work, how units function together, and doing your research. Just because you haven't, necessarily served doesn't mean that you can't reach out to people who have, and anybody that's been in the military is happy to talk about their experience or how things work, because nobody hates bad military stuff than military people. I go and watch a military movie and my wife won't go with me anymore because I'm like, that's wrong. No, that isn't. No, stop. Oh God, come on again. So you don't have to be in the military to write military, and certainly, just being in the military isn't a caveat to write everything military. I flew planes. That doesn't help me, in ground combat. That doesn't help me in, driving ships or tanks. I go, when I'm doing that, I go to the expert. I mentioned Kevin Eikenberry. He and I wrote a book about tanks, and he was a tank commander. So all the time I was like, well, hey, what about this? What about this? What about this? And he's like, come on, Chris. Not really. No. But then when it shifted to flying and he was doing stuff, and I was like, Kevin, no. So, go to the expert and make it work.
I would add to that, it's the same with science and the science part of military science fiction. If you're going to throw science out there, man, you better find yourself an expert and ask lots of questions. Otherwise, they will burn you for that big time in your reviews. I had an incident in my first novel, Mako, where I had to explain how environmental exposures, things in the environment, change a person's genetic code, how they change the human genome, because I had to explain how it is I've got humans from a completely different galaxy in a completely different world who are very much like the humans on Earth, but there are slight genetic differences between the two species of humans. And so I thought, okay, let's talk about the environment in that. Even though Earth and Aura, which was the planet in that, are going to be very, very similar, you're going to evolve in a very similar state, but there are subtle environmental differences. How would that play out in their genetics? Well, now you're getting into an area of science called epigenetics or epigenomics. Nice thing about fun fact for the National Institutes of Health, they have a wonderful little web service called the NIH Reporter, where you can go and you can run a keyword search for pretty much any topic you want. And it spits out the names of a whole bunch of different scientists who get federal grant funding to study those things. So I was like, awesome. A buddy of mine told me about that. I went in and I typed in epigenetics. I sent out about 10 emails. I end up getting hooked up with a guy from Johns Hopkins who's an instructor over there. And he's like, dude, I love sci-fi. I'd love to consult with you on your book. So next thing I know, he comes back to me with an email. He's like, okay, so here's how you should write this. And just to prove it, I put this before my class. And for the last hour, 20 grad students at Johns Hopkins have been debating how humans would be different on your world versus Earth. So you can put this in your book. We're good. All right. And we're done here.
I totally get that. One of my earlier theogony books, I used antimatter, and I got a review that said, obviously this author has no idea how antimatter works. I'm a physics professor at Duke University, and I understand antimatter and he doesn't. So I was like, oh, really? Okay. So I looked him up and I found him, and I said, okay, since you're so smart, how about I send my next book to you and you can QA it? And he said, okay, sure. And I said, oh, by the way, I want to do this thing. Tell me how it would work. So he proposed it to his grad students, and said, okay, how does this thing work? And they all came up with different things, and he took the best one and he gave it to me. And I was like, okay, great, sure, great. And I showed it to another science friend of mine. He's like, yeah, but that's all wrong. I'm like, how am I supposed to win? It's a Duke physics professor. He didn't know what he was talking about at this.
The fact that it was a Duke prof should have told you something, man. I'm just putting that out there.
I went to Carolina, so it went against everything, that I had going for me to actually talk to a Duke instructor. And then he gave me bad advice. He probably knew I went to Carolina. Who knows?
I used to live in Durham, so I know the battle there.
Awesome. Yeah, I lived in Durham for about 10 years. So we can compare notes when I'm down there at the end of we can compare notes when I'm down there at the end of the month. Sounds
good. Okay, just a general, what has been your favorite recent book that you've read?
So not in genre.
It doesn't have to be in genre, yeah.
Not in genre. I'm going to go with Sammy Hagar's autobiography. I was a huge Van Halen guy, particularly through the 90s. I'm one of those weirdos who thinks Van Halen was a better band with Sammy Hagar than they were with David Lee Roth. People throw rocks. I know. I get rocks thrown at me regularly at cons for that. But yeah, I was a huge Sammy fan. I've followed his career all the way up through his solo stuff, and then Van Halen, post Van Halen. And I only recently got around to reading his autobiography, which just really shed a lot of light on not only his time with the Van Halen brothers, but also why it is he's such a dynamic entrepreneur, and how he figured out very early on in his career, because he was fortunate enough to get hooked up with a manager that told him the truth. Listen, man, you can either be rich or you can be famous. But all these guys running around in rock and roll who have these huge, extravagant theatrical shows, there's a reason why they're broke at the end of their tour and they're running to go right back on tour to make more money. It's because they're blowing it all. So be wise with your money, learn how to invest and be smart. And that's how you get ahead in this business. And you fast forward to, 2016, I think, which when the book came out. He's like, you know what? Looking at where the music business is now today with streaming and everything else, there's no business in it anymore. But because of the way I've set myself up over the years with the different investments that I've made, I now play music just because I love it. And when you get a record from me, it came straight from my heart because I didn't need to make money off of it. I put it out there because I loved it and I wanted you guys to hear it. So great read from top to bottom if you're a rock fan. Sammy Hagar Uncensored, or read My Uncensored Life in Rock and Roll from Sammy Hagar. Good read.
I'm going to go with Responsibility of the Crown, which is a fantasy book that released the same day as Ian and my book, Street Survivors. It is by Scott Huggins, who is the only person to ever win both of Bane's short story contests. They have both a science fiction and a fantasy short story contest. He is the only person to win both of them. And this story really shows it. I hadn't read a lot of fantasy recently, even though I do publish fantasy. Most of the stuff I'd had recently was sci-fi. But reading this was great. It is a half dragon. The story is about a half dragon who is left on a ship to sail the ocean, and her having to find herself and where she fits in society. And you can guess Responsibility of the Crown, that she may be someone fairly important. It's the first book in a trilogy, and it is great. I can't wait for the second book.
We talked a little bit about this with doing some research and stuff. So what is the strangest thing? If we pulled up your computer right now, what is the strangest thing in your search history right now?
Recently?
Yeah.
I mean, the one that's going to get me with the FBI is how to make thermite bombs. That one's the oops. It's not how many lists. It's not am I on the list. It's how many lists am I now on. When you start getting into blowing things up or killing people or how does, when you shoot somebody, how does that affect them? How fast do you die if you get hit by, a bullet, where, things like that.
So I had to do
Really,
a lot
FBI, I'm an author. I've got books. I can prove it.
research. That's why there are so many big searches for cocaine and cocaine plants and cocaine. Yeah, all of that on mine because I had to create a drug for Detroit City Vice. I mean, you can't have a Miami Vice story without drugs because that's kind of what they did back then. So, I had to create this kind of criminal underworld, and it's all built around this drug that has popped up at the fringes of deep space that is now working its way into civilized society, and they don't want it there. And yet the smugglers and the pirates and the people of the world who come from this specific part of the system, they keep finding ways to get through customs and get it out. And so that's kind of where our story begins, if you will, for Danny Tucker. But I mean, that required doing a lot of research into how that whole world works and functions. And there were rules that I had to build in for how long plants can last, after you've extracted them from the ground, or do you have to store them, or how long do they have, do you have to cook them? I mean, how does that work? Because I had to model all of my stuff around that research. So I'm not a druggie. I promise, FBI, you don't have to come looking for me. It was just for the book.
Well, we're kind of wrapping up here. Is there anything else that you would like to share with our listeners?
We've talked about a number of different things today. You can find everything you want to know about Chris Kennedy Publishing at chriskennedypublishing.com. There are a couple groups on Facebook that if you're interested, come join us. You can search for The Factory Floor, which will get you to the Chris Kennedy Publishing Factory Floor Facebook group. Or you can search on 4HU, the Four Horsemen Universe, 4HU, and that'll get you to that one.
Same thing for me. ianjmalone.net is the website for me. If you want to know pretty much anything about me, that's where you go. From how to find me on social media, I'm on Facebook and Twitter, to stuff about my podcast, the Dudes in Hyperspace podcast. That's a kind of a thing that was born out of the fact that lots of people love to come up to me at cons and talk about either sci-fi books or sports and barbecue. And so I said, let's make a show. So I recruited a couple of fellow authors, and that's basically what we talk about twice a month is what we're writing, projects, the craft. We bring in other authors and interview them and talk about their stuff. And then sometimes we bring in Bob Stern from the Athletic to break down the NFL draft, or Mike Schlabach to do our ESPN college football preview. So you never really know what you're going to get on the Dudes in Hyperspace
Check out
podcast.
the Dudes.
Yeah, the Dudes. Presented by chriskennedypublishing.com. So ianjmalone.net is where you can find everything about me. New book is The Street Survivors, collaboration with Chris Kennedy. Thank you so much to everybody who has already bought and reviewed that book. It was #1 in action adventure literature on Amazon opening weekend. So that is always very special when you get the orange tag. Thanks so much to that. And then finally, all the folks down there in Bay County and in the Panhandle and in Northwest Florida, we really hope you guys will come out to Lasers and Loggers on June 29th. Again, that's going to be happening at the library on Beck starting at 5 p.m. local time. It's going to be whatever you guys want it to be. If you want us to do readings, we're going to have books in tow ready to read from them. If you want to buy books, we're going to have some for you to buy. Mentioned before, we're going to have a door raffle where you're going to get to win all kinds of fun stuff, signed books, Merc patches, merch. I'm told there's probably going to be some bar tabs in there for grabs from the library. All of that's going to be up for grabs with all the proceeds going to benefit Friends of the Bay County Public Libraries. But none of that happens if folks don't come out. So we certainly hope we get to see you there. Again, if you want more information on that, go to lasersandloggers.com, read all up. You can also follow the event on Facebook. We're putting out periodic updates on authors with information, and pretty much anything you need to know about the event is going to be right there. But thank you guys so much for having us on the podcast. It's been a blast hanging out with y'all.
Absolutely. Thanks for having us.
And that is Lasers and Loggers as the beer, not as in the lumberjacks. Lagers.
Correct.
Thank you so much, Ian and Chris, for joining us at the BCPL Unstacked. Into the Light by Chris Kennedy and David Weber is in the library collection for checkout. And we plan to add more titles after Lasers and Loggers.
Check out chriskennedypublishing.com to find out more about the authors and how to purchase their books. Stay safe and read, my friend. It's good for you. Bye.
Bye.